So welcome along then to our end of season reviews, and once again we're here down at the Five Rivers in Beavers Valley, and if you're watching on YouTube you can click on the card above our heads to listen to the bumper edition of the end of season reviews, available to download on most audio platforms also below the show. But for YouTube, enjoy our bite-sized reviews of the 2018-19 season, and we'll be taking your questions and clips along the way. This episode is once again sponsored by OneFootball, and do make sure you check out the excellent free OneFootball app to keep up to date and be first to know of all the latest transfer news, the rumours, stats and scores, all in one place. To download the OneFootball app, click the link in the description. So if we move on then to December and May, the tide finally turned then. Ralph Hasenhuttl, after a little bit of speculation, he was hired to steer the ship, and he took over with 3 points from safety, and ultimately, we know the end of the story, but it was 5 points from Cardiff City.
Yeah, I mean, the weekend of the Manchester United match, I had to miss the game. I was in Vienna on a conference. So some people, suddenly Ralph's name come into play, and people going, what are you over in Vienna for? We looked at this Austrian manager. But I can assure you that I was no part of the selection process over there, nor was I in any fit state to be, as it was a company conference. So it was a surprise. Not many people had heard a lot about Ralph Hasenhuttl when he joined. I mean, those who take a keen interest perhaps knew more than others, but, you know, he'd been in Red Bull Leipzig, who in many respects have only had a bit of money pumped in, or a team that came there and building from, you know, not very strong foundations. You know, they're a relatively new formed team. So there was the Saints connection in that Paul Mitchell was at Red Bull Leipzig as a director of football or whatever. So when he came in, there wasn't a lot of great enthusiasm initially, because we just didn't know him.
Yeah.
So the first game, a rain-sodden game at Cardiff, where we didn't play badly, but it was the same old. We didn't play badly, and then Yannick Vestergaard hit a short ball, and Cardiff scored for the only goal of the game. So his first game wasn't outstanding, but his second game really made us think, actually, we got someone here who can restore, you know, the Arsenal game at home and the win and the manner of which it was achieved, and his passion at the end of it on running around. And we suddenly realised, hey, here's a man who gets it.
If we highlight a couple of things from those two games, it was a culture shock, if you like, at Cardiff City. You know, still maintaining sort of the individual errors, ultimately, which cost us the game. But the Arsenal game, and I suppose the build up to it as well, that he called the players in for extra training sessions every day of the week. We hear working extra hard on shape, tactics, and God knows what else. And we hear that he also called in individual players for meetings to outline what he wants from them. I'm sure he's had a lot of information and detail for the squad. But the Arsenal game, in fact, was finally a win against the top six side for the first time in almost 2.5 years.
Yeah, and that was part of it. I mean, you're right. He doing a bit of meticulous planning, but it was all very well and good saying, yeah, he gets players in, he speaks to them individually and that. But we'd had people like Claude Puel do that, and we'd had 3 managers who'd been uninspiring. And you know, okay, you know, there are plenty of managers who on the face of it aren't particularly inspiring, but it was still unknown territory. But that Arsenal game just turned it a little bit, because we'd heard all the, statistically, and he looks and he's meticulous in his plan and he wants to do that, but we needed to see something, and we needed a bit of excitement. And you know, what got it going that game, you thought he can inspire players, you know, but more to the point, he got it. You know, he saw the crowd as being integral to a football club, and he saw the crowd getting behind the team. Now, it wasn't going to happen overnight, but a few people started to say at that stage, actually, there's hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
And the enthusiasm, it was refreshing, actually, for people coming out of the ground to speak to them about actually a win, finally, in, what was it, almost 3 months, actually, almost to the day, you know? Yeah. But Ralph Hasenhuttl, I mean, from that day on, you know, it really injected a bit of like I say, enthusiasm and an impetus for the team in particular as well, for actually to go up against toe-to-toe against Arsenal, who at the time were 23 games unbeaten.
Yeah, and I mean, what he really brought to the squad was a little bit of confidence. I mean, what he banished from the squad was negativity. And I mean, I've said this on many times throughout the season, both, on here or on the uglyInside.net, is that you've got to create atmospheres where teams can play. The greatest team in the world can't play to its best if you've constantly got an aura of negativity behind it. And unfortunately, we got to a point where at this stage when Ralph came in, the supporters would moan at anything or anything. You just couldn't create it. The scapegoats were there. Everyone was bad. There's nothing good. But Ralph come in and said, right, okay, I'll start with the team. I'll get the team with positive. We'll think positive, and I think it took about 3 months, and it never really hit the main part of the fan base for a couple of months after that. But those on the more positive side of things could see it after the Arsenal game and could see it after the Huddersfield game and knew that there's a lot to work on, but they knew that there was something different there.
And we did follow it up, like you say, with a win at Huddersfield. Just before Christmas, there was a scarf, or was it a Santa hat in every seat in freezing cold Huddersfield. A very similar time what happened last year where we played them, it was home last season,
Well, that's what it does. It brings a bit of good feeling. I mean, let's not forget that the Arsenal game that Ralph had bought us all a pint.
Yes.
Before
Yes.
I'm sure he didn't pay for it himself, but
well, I didn't get mine until after the weekend. It was late in the post.
Yeah. So he bought everyone buy your good self a pint. He's perhaps trying to tell you something there. But Huddersfield game, he got the Santa hats out, and even those old cynics like me, couldn't fail to be quite happy to see 2,000 people waving these Santa hats in the air and things like that. And he came, and again, this was perhaps the first time because he came up to the support after we won 3-1, and he cheered and bowed, and you think, yeah, he gets it. And that's the whole point, he gets it. And that was the first thing. He knew that there was a lot of things wrong with the club, and he still can see there's things that need to be addressing in the transfer window. But the first thing is get everyone kicking in the same direction as quickly as possible.
If we highlight that game in particular, the 2 goals, firstly, Nathan Redmond, I suppose that was the first glimmer of the performances that we were going to see later on from Nathan Redmond for the rest of the season. I suppose the first chance we got to see of actually Ralph sort of unlocking his potential with a fantastic goal.
Yeah, but it should be remembered that Nathan Redmond had probably been our best player in the first, even under Mark Hughes. I mean, undoubtedly, Ralph Hasenhuttl has had an effect on Nathan Redmond. But to be honest, at the end of last season, it was hard to see a future for Nathan Redmond at the club. He was the whipping boy of the crowd. People were saying he was rubbish, and I think people were moaning at me now for sticking up for Wesley Hoot. But a year ago, I was possibly the only person in the city who said Nathan Redmond's a good player, because he hadn't had the season that he should have. But I think, in fairness to him, he went away, he thought about it, and thought, actually, I could either go off into oblivion or I can really have a go. And he came back, and I don't know whether Mark Hughes had anything to do with that. He certainly didn't last season, because he didn't really play a lot under Mark Hughes, but he came back in, and Nathan Redmond, if not the player of the season so far up until Ralph Hasenhutt's arrival, was definitely the only other person, bar perhaps Pierre Højbjerg or maybe Danny Ings, who was in with a shout. But Ralph came in and built on those foundations and gave him the confidence, because under Mark Hughes, it was just Redmond going out and playing and thinking, I'm just going to play without fear. Under Ralph, a bit like Alan Ball did with Matthew Le Tissier, Ralph came in and said, get the ball to him, let him do it. So you're right. The turn of the year sort of saw Redmond really start, but I think the turn of the year, he got this one half of the crowd that wasn't on his side, but on his side. So by the end of it, there's not many people who could have a bad word to say about Nathan Redmond, although there are still those that do.
Of course there are. And one more thing at the game against Huddersfield, Michael Obafemi, youngster coming through from the academy, and another sort of a name to add to the tally of scoring a first-team goal.
Yeah, I mean, he came in. I mean, he played before the Huddersfield game. It was just the Huddersfield game was his first goal, and I mean, he played at that. He'd come on a sub in that game at Fulham. When, to be fair, he'd missed a couple of decent chances. I mean, I think he played after. I'm not sure if he played in the Arsenal game we played before, but maybe against Manchester United he came on as well. But at that stage, his first few games, he had a lot of pace. He got in a lot of goal-scoring opportunities, but he didn't score.
Yeah.
And I said to someone at the time, if that was Shane Long who missed at Fulham, I said, if that was Shane Long who missed that, he'd be getting murdered by the support. But he scored at Huddersfield, but then suddenly he's picking up an injury, which again is strange. And I thought when he signed his new contract, sort of in the new year, he said something that's telling. He goes, I'd like to thank the club for standing by me. So there was clearly something, a little bit more of an injury, why he wasn't appearing in the first team. And I still think that now. I think that, you know, the club have nurtured him a bit. Ralph has nurtured him, and you've got to hope that he'll look at that, benefit from it, and move on to become the player he could be.
Yeah. Obviously ravaged by injuries for the rest of the season, but
Allegedly.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. That was followed up though by 2 back-to-back defeats, West Ham and Man City at home. But the turn of the year was a chance really for a rebirth of some players. In fact, we saw Angus Gunn make his Premier League debut at Chelsea, keeping a clean sheet, and in a similar fashion what happened to Alex McCarthy last season, due to the circumstances of the first choice goalkeeper and keeping a clean sheet this time round. And Gunn was hardly displaced for the rest of the season.
I think Chelsea was a game where we got a 0-0 draw, but when you look back on the game, we got lucky. I mean, there were 3 or 4 people go 0-0 draw and, oh yeah, we're defensively we were awful that day. And the fact that we did the same old was we gave them 4 clear strikes on goal with just to keep it a beat. Not one-on-one, but we're a bit like the goal in the cup final, the opening goal, where the guy's pulled off the defender, got himself 3 yards, and has got a clear shot at goal from whatever distance in the penalty area. And that's what happened at Chelsea. 4 times our central defence lost their man they're marking, and 4 times he got it on target. 3 times Angus Gunn made great saves, and the other time the linesman's flag, they put the ball home, but the linesman's flag went up. Bit dodgy, when they played through it, someone's hand might have been keeping them onside. But that was a game we got luck in. And that was the next step forward, because we thought we're starting to make our own luck. We're starting to get a bit of luck, which we hadn't early in the season. 6 games earlier, Chelsea had won 4-0.
Well, that brings me perfectly on to our next game then, Leicester City away, and quite fortuitous and quite lucky to some respect, but we finished the game with 10 men, but a 2-1 result away from home, and Shane Long getting on the score sheet, and at the time I think it was 4 goals in 4 different managers, and James Ward-Prowse really kicking on under Ralph Hasenhuttl instructions and smashing away that penalty.
Yeah. Well, Shane Long had started to become, again, had been the scapegoat of the team. I mean, people had forgotten, well, at this stage, Shane Long hasn't scored in X amount of months, games, years, or whatever. Oh, he's rubbish, he's not done anything. But they forgot the games he had, for instance, up at Palace, where Shane Long was instrumental in the first goal and in building the victory. And when we went off at Palace, again, people forget, when Shane Long went off and we had no one to hold up the ball, no one to create space, suddenly we were struggling. And we held out against Palace, and then we scored it. The result looks more comfortable than the game was. For 70 minutes, we were totally in charge and 1-0 up. For the next 20 minutes, after Long had gone up at Palace, we lacked anyone to hold off and make goals. Too many people looked at Shane Long and said, he's not scoring goals. But his game is more about goals. Same as Danny Ings, which we'll come on to. But at that game against Leicester, Shane Long's persistence scored a great goal, and his persistence got a penalty and put us in 2-0 up at half time. And that game was very much Shane Long's.
I think I also remember Shane Long setting up that final goal at home to Arsenal with a dink across a dink across the box to find Charlie Austin. So we saw, I suppose, a glimmer of Shane Long really starting to kick on as well, and ultimately the manager was starting to get the best out of. It could be said a bad bunch, but if we look at the results that sandwiched the Leicester City game, the FA Cup in the third round, 2-2 on both days at Derby County, and ultimately eliminated on penalties. Disappointment. We always like to progress in the cup, but it wasn't to be this year.
No, again, it was a typical thing. 2-0 up in both games, thrown away in the last 20 minutes in both games. You just sometimes have to write it off. At this stage, we weren't concerned with cup runs, we were concerned with the league. Personally, I wanted to play Accrington Stanley in the next round, but I sacrificed that for the greater good.
Accrington Stanley. I'm sure we all. I think we're all looking at it. Yeah, I would love to go there, but it's a tiny little ground. But moving back to the Premier League then, Everton at home, another turning point for the season, another game James Ward-Prowse getting on the score sheet, and we saw, I suppose, some characteristics of him really getting stuck in, adding an extra bite to his tackle, crunching into those tackles, winning the ball back and smashing home another goal.
Well, as much as I can say that Nathan Redmond had pulled himself up by the bootstraps for the first half of the season, James Ward-Prowse hadn't. And when we got to January, Ward-Prowse hadn't featured a lot under Ralph, hadn't really featured or been impressive in the first half of the season at least. But here's the Ralph Hasenhuttl factor, because he clearly sat down with James Ward-Prowse and said, you've been here 6 years or been playing 6 years, 7 years, and you're going nowhere. You've got the potential. You need to get the potential. And as you say, he started to show it in the Everton game, but he really showed it for me in the Crystal Palace game, where James Ward-Prowse had always been the nice guy, comes from a nice family. His father's a Queen's Counsel barrister. He's polite. And, you'd almost feel it sometimes, James would go after you when players were coming through or apologise. But late on in that game, when Wilfred Zaha got sent off, he showed he wasn't scared. Zaha tried to get in his face and scare him, and he patted him on the cheek, and he pretended to throw the ball at him, and various things like that. And then that day, for me, against Crystal Palace, you saw that James Ward-Prowse had come of age and had listened, and that, again, it was another Ralph Hasenhuttl factor, making a good player play to his potential.
That was good fun watching him wind up Wilfred Zaha, and eventually he got sent off for the petulance, swinging his arms, ranting at the referee. And that was brilliant. I think James Ward-Prowse really kind of added a bit of a cult hero status to his game that way, and at that point for the rest of the season, he almost looked displaceable. But if we move on to the rest of February and into March, the draw at Burnley and a defeat at home to Cardiff. A very disappointing afternoon with Cardiff City.
Firstly, Burnley. Burnley, we taken control of the game. Again, another great Nathan Redmond goal. And we really should have seen it out. This was the real lack of central defenders that cost us. And it was a game that could have cost us very dearly. When they just threw the ball up at Peter Crouch for the last 10 minutes, and in the last minute, Peter Crouch, photographic evidence, TV evidence showed that Crouch had more of Jack Stevens' shirt. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you don't throw your hand up. You stand strong. You get there, and that just showed the lack of experience, a lack of quality that we had in that centre of defence. I'm sorry, but we threw that game away, and those 2 points would have really turned the season at that stage. But the next game was the worst, because we didn't play badly against Cardiff for much of the game, and then we did what we did. We let them score unmarked at the far post. I can't remember whose fault it is. We dragged ourselves in it, and at 1-1, you close the game off. But again, we gave a stupid pass.
It all happened so quickly, though. We equalised with a minute or so left to play. Jack Stevens, who went from zero to hero in the space of a week, but then in the space of 2 minutes. Go again
Well,
from
less than 2 minutes, about 90 seconds.
it goes again from hero to zero, and it was almost a carbon copy. I remember we scored it. I think our only goal from a corner this season, not from his head but from his feet eventually. And I think it was Bamba that scored their winner. We had no time at all to reply, and at that point, it was probably the worst defeat or the lowest defeat that Ralph had experienced.
Well, probably the overriding factor of the season, which we haven't brought up, is we've got no leader on the pitch. I mean, you look, we were doing well under Ronald Koeman, and even Claude Puel, to a degree. We had leaders in the back of the centre of defence. Fonte led by, marshalling and experience, and Virgil van Dijk led by example. But we had no leaders. When you've snatched a draw from the jaws of defeat, as they say, you don't start trying to play stupid balls long distance. You keep it short, you keep it tight, and you accept you've got a bit of luck. But we pile forward. Jack Stevens tried to play a stupid ball that he was never going to reach its intended target, and they went forward and scored, and that was typical. Some people say that I've got something against Jack Stevens or something against Yoshida. I've got nothing against them other than they're not good enough to get into a Premier League football team.
And it was back-to-back weeks that we conceded in virtually the last kick of the game. Let's draw a line under that, though. Moving forward into the rest of February and into March, though, a defeat at Arsenal, a win at home against Fulham, another goal from James Ward-Prowse. But I suppose the next week, in fact, at Old Trafford, two goal of the season contenders, beating, they say, the best goalkeeper in the Premier League or in the world, David De Gea, and unlucky on the day, but that game really showed a lot of fight and spirit, and we showed no fear to come away from Old Trafford with a a point or a victory.
Well, I think after the Arsenal game was a 2-0 defeat. We never looked like winning it, and after the Arsenal game, you just sort of felt maybe things had changed. Maybe if we'd after it was always going to be a bit up and down, because, as I say, they'd taken this calculated gamble that not getting in a decent defender, they could get through it without one.
I'll say.
And after the Arsenal game, you felt it's going to be difficult. Prior to the Arsenal game, you felt that at Burnley and Cardiff, we get through those games unbeaten and we're in the winning straight. But suddenly, after giving away 2 last-minute goals and then losing at Arsenal, you felt that we were in a bit of trouble here. The horses were coming up behind us. And the Fulham game was the first start of it, because we played Fulham at home, lowest crowd of the season, 2-0, and we won it. And as you say, it changed a little bit. We suddenly pulled a few points clear, and we had a bit more confidence. Manchester United, we went out and played without fear, and that told a lot of people that perhaps we had some fight in us, because a year ago we hadn't. But we had the fight in. Ironically, we lost it in the final seconds, and ironically, it goes back to what I'm saying. We didn't get a foot in. Their man had the ball, and we didn't slide in and block him. When they'd done it previously, their guy had slid in, deflections, taking the ball over the bar. We didn't get the block in. We ran alongside him, and we don't get the blocks in. And I don't need to point out who it was, but let's just say it's a serial offender. Doesn't get the block in. Guy gets a free shot at goal, goes in. Wonder goal, block it, doesn't happen. We get a 2-2 draw. But you're right, the nature of the performance sort of gave people hope. And people said, hang on, James Ward-Prowse, brilliant goal. Valerie, strike of the season type thing. Suddenly we saw hope. And then we went into the Tottenham game, and the Tottenham game was the change in attitude of their fans, the players, and everything. And when I walked out of St Mary's after that game, there was something that I hadn't experienced at St Mary's for a long time, and that was an outbreak of happiness. and for once, people weren't walking out and slagging off players, even players that had done well. I'd walked out of games where we won. People go, Nathan Redmond, crap. James Ward-Prowse, crap. Wesley Hoot, crap. Even though they might have had decent games. after that game, everyone was coming out saying, brilliant. We've beaten Tottenham at home for the first time since 2004. You know, we can do that. It's a comeback. You know, we were 1-0 down to late on, and then we've come back, and it was great. The feel-good factor was back, and you felt that things had changed.
Yeah, it was sheer euphoria and I suppose an outbreak of elation coming out of St Mary's that day. And I think must have been almost 2 years. Again, a long record without coming back from a game. And the record speaks for itself this season, losing games from winning positions. But a quick note on those, I suppose the 4 goals, in fact, back-to-back weeks. Jan Valery and James Ward-Prowse on the score sheet. Jan Valery's first, his rocket into the top corner. We know the end of the story with that from the official clubs and the votes. But a carbon copy free kick of James Ward-Prowse in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, suddenly again, James Ward-Prowse had confidence. And as we came out of the, you know, when we walked out a couple of weeks earlier, or 3 against Fulham winning, there was still that, oh, bloody hell, we got lucky. Oh, wasn't so-and-so crap. Oh, what's it? Too many Saints fans have got into an attitude of the default way of supporting the team is not by saying, come on, Saints, but going, for fuck's sake, Saints. You know, moaning, being prepared to have a moan at the bad things, but not praising the good things. And suddenly, when we came out of, for the first time in, maybe 2 years, there's a feel-good factor about it. And the fans' attitude had changed. You know, in the pub afterwards and that, people were genuinely, no one was talking negatives. Everyone was talking positives, and everyone was saying, we got a great manager, we got a great team, we know that there's issues, but we know that we've got fight in us now. And that's where it all changed against Tottenham.
Followed up by a win at Brighton. And actually, this is probably a left field choice for a goal of the season. A very well worked goal between Nathan Redmond and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, playing a 1-2, weaving in and out the defenders, and Højbjerg running over to the fans, giving it all the gusto in front of the support. And at that point of the season, we're starting to pull away, and really the confidence. I suppose it rarely was tested earlier on the season, but at that point, we're in the driving seat to stay up.
Yeah, at that point, we went to Brighton and won, who were our biggest sort of rivals to be dragged into the bottom 3 if Cardiff could have their revival. So to go there and do it, and as you say, it's quite right. It was a tough game. We defended. They were the type of team we didn't like to play against because their one tactic is to sling the ball up to a big man at the back in Glenn Murray, who's damaged us before. So we did that, and we took the goal well, played well, got a result, and that was good. I mean, we followed it up with Liverpool at home, and for 80 minutes we matched them. But at the end of the day, perhaps what went wrong there was 80 minutes we got caught, as we have a lot of times. We got caught on the edge of attacking on the edge of their box, and suddenly find them with 2 or 3 players bearing down on us at ours. And, Mo Salah scored a wonder goal, and the rest, they say, is history.
And actually, we need to give credit to the team that day, because I suppose if we were under Mark Hughes against Liverpool, we didn't really offer much of a fight. We sort of went up to Anfield earlier on the season with a whimper and the defeatist mentality. But that Friday night game against Liverpool, we went toe-to-toe, and for the most part, we could have taken something. But like I say, it wasn't to be. And actually, I remember speaking to Mick after the game. He'd had a few sherries, let's be fair, but hanging on to the rails, bless you, Mick, and saying that Liverpool won't win the league. So that was probably a told you so moment, and actually the Liverpool fans gave him so much abuse online after that.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it was a game. I mean, that was almost a game of 2 halves, as they say, in that on one hand, it showed us what we were capable of going forward. But on the other hand, it also highlighted all the frailties that we had. And if there's one thing Ralph Hasenhuttl must be tearing out his head, his hair or whatever, because at the end of the day, it was another goal where we're attacking and it comes to leadership, because what that was at that game, no one seemed to be saying, everyone's piling forward like an under-12 side, and no one sat at the back going, hang on a minute, we need to keep people back. We need to keep people on the edge of the area. We need to do that. And no one's pointing out. So they broke. they scored. I mean, saying that Liverpool wouldn't win the league at that stage was a bit premature in the fact that Liverpool, I think, won every game after that, and so did Manchester City.
Yeah.
Liverpool weren't a bad side, but just Manchester City finished stronger.
And I suppose if if you remember, I just sort of at the start of the show, I said we look at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the season, and the final 6 games we didn't have to play any of the top 6, but a win against Wolves, and ultimately it did finish with a whimper, only picking up points against Watford and Bournemouth and Huddersfield, 3 points. Let's have a look at it. 6 points from the last 6 games, and Ralph set a target of 40 points. Ultimately, we finished with 39.
Yeah, I mean, the first game of the last 6 finished was a great game. Wolves, a highly fancy team, finished 7th, came here, and we beat them. I mean, again, it showed the irony. I mean, the number of people who I spoke to after this game who said, Danny Ings, rubbish, we shouldn't be buying him, he's crap, he hasn't scored in God knows how long, he hasn't done that. And then in the evening, you watch Match of the Day, and Match of the Day said, let's highlight Danny Ings. And suddenly, Danny Ings... Actually, he was heavily involved in the first goal. He scored the second, and he should have had one himself. And he played through some delightful through balls. And what it showed is that Danny Ings, if we get another goal scorer alongside Danny Ings won't just score goals; he'll create them and he'll make them. And like Long, a lot of the stuff, the first goal against Wolves doesn't feature on the stats for assists or anything, but it's as much as an assist. And Ings does stuff like Long. What he brings to the team is he's at the first stage of play when you're attacking.
We almost saw Danny Ings actually taking up this false 9 sort of striking, dropping deep to release the ball and spreading it out wide to Nathan Redmond and Shane Long.
Absolutely, and that's what he did well in that game. He creates trouble, and the problem is, and again, this is where too many people just look at statistics and goals and say he hasn't scored. You look at, I remember when we came... late on again at Brighton in the win, when we came 1-0 on, when Ings went off, we lost a lot. Sam Gallagher came on, and he had plenty of running and he had plenty of enthusiasm. But what he didn't have was Ings's guile, because for that first goal, Redmond made the goal and put the through ball through, but Ings had made the run off the ball, which created the space for Redmond and Højbjerg to go in, whilst their defenders went with Ings, who went the other way. And what Ings and Shane Long bring is a lot of off-the-ball running. They make the right runs off the ball, which pulls defenders over the place and creates space for others to score. And
at this point of the season, Shane Long is scoring goals for fun. It's a far cry, a universe away from his previous records. And Nick, you're infamously known for turning up late for games. And did you see Shane Long's record-breaking goal at Watford?
Yeah, I did actually. Funnily enough, luckily, I had gone to the game with fellow TUI founder and conspirator Clive Foley, who is very famous for his reticence for not getting a drink in. And Clive had, in typical fashion, we'd had 3 drinks before the game, and with half an hour to go, and it was Clive's round.
Oh.
I said, "Are we going to have another drink, Clive?" "Oh, well," he said. Again...
Was there a kitty involved?
There was no kitty involved. It was just me and Clive going toe-to-toe on buying pints. And Clive went, "Oh, I'll get it after the game," he said. "I'll get one after the game," in the hope that our driver would say, "Let's get straight off after the game," and then my memory would be blurred. So, luckily enough for both of us, because Clive didn't get his round in before the game, late on before, and had tried to push it to after to escape buying it full stop, luckily enough, we were in the ground and stood in our seats to see Shane Long score that goal. So thank you, Clive. And I will say that, unfortunately for Clive, the driver, our mate Pat from Poole, said, "Yeah, I'll go and get the car and I'll meet you outside the pub," type thing. So Clive had to get his wallet out for a second time on that day, week, and indeed probably month.
Well, there you go then. If we quickly cover the statistics for the Premier League and all competitions, 45 goals, 31 inside the box, and actually it must be a record in quite a few seasons, 14 outside the box, 3 from set pieces. And the player of all the goals this season, 9 for Nathan Redmond in all competitions. Danny Ings, our top scorer in Premier League action. And it gives you no surprise that Oriol Romeu finished on the highest yellow cards again this season.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics go in there. I mean, some of the things you look at, Yannick Vestergaard, 192 clearances, which perhaps shows you just how involved he was in the game. So what that tells you in certain respects is he knows where the ball is. He's read the game well because he's been behind it. Alex McCarthy, 78 saves. I mean, it's strange that he should have more saves than perhaps Angus Gunn, but it also shows you that perhaps we're not letting people get in as many chances in the second half of the season as we did in the first, or not most of them in the second half of the season. In fact, most of them throughout the season, you could point the finger at someone on every goal. We very rarely gave away a goal where it was totally unstoppable. But yeah, I mean, this season is over. We've got a good squad. We finished with a whimper, as you say, but I think once we were safe, Ralph Hasenhuttl was immediately looking to next season. West Ham United was definitely a little bit of experiment. He knows where it's gone wrong, so those who after the Huddersfield game were going, the number of people who moaned after the Huddersfield game that we lost the last game of the season. Who cares? All that cares for Ralph Hasenhuttl, all that mattered once relegation was mathematically secured is next season, and that's all we've got to look at.
And that was ultimately what it was. And there's been quite a few questions from our commenters, but I mean, we always bemoan about being on TV, and actually it was one of the record low tally this season. 8 times we're on TV, and also playing every day of a calendar week this season. So there's another interesting fact as well. So one final question, just to really finish up with a comment from asmith07 on Instagram, and you sort of noted on it just a second ago. I mean, where could the Saints have finished if Ralph was here this whole season?
Well, I think Ralph's points per game ratio, even after our whimper finish, was 1.3 per game. If you times that up by 38, we'd have finished, I think we're joint with West Ham on 11 in 11th. Now, we'd have finished behind them on goal difference if you just transpose 11 points, but possibly because of the fact we'd have won a few more games, we'd have probably finished 11. We'd have probably had a better goal difference. So we'd have finished 11th if Ralph Hasenhuttl just had replicated his points total over the season. Now, what we've got to look at, if he can get that total with what he has got to work with this season and how many games were thrown away by poor defending, then what can he do next season if he gets the right people in? We know that we need 2 or 3 signings. We know where they are, and we know where our squad's strong. It doesn't, Ralph Hasenhuttl doesn't need to be Mystic Meg to work that out, and I'm sure he knows. So overall, it's a good season because it's a season when it turned again, and we could start to look at Saints with positivity. We could look forward with hope. And sadly, as the FA Cup final proved, the big 6 clubs are now way, way, way above, and it's sad. And, from my perspective, I think it's sad that Manchester City won the league, not because of my Liverpool connections, but because
family connections, by the way. No club bias at all.
No club bias, family connections. But what Manchester City have done is bought the league. The fact that they're going to get sanctions for the financial fair play, the fact that they spent 50 million 4 years ago when they got sanctioned just to buy their way out of it. They've bought the league, they've bought the cups, and it's a sad day for football when you get an FA Cup final where a team loses 6-0. The first time since Bury in 2003 beat...
1903.
1903, not 2003. That's when we lost. But in conclusion, the fact that Bury won the FA Cup twice back then, and no one considers them a big club, perhaps suggests that other clubs that have won trophies pre-war but consider themselves big clubs might need to take a long, hard look at themselves whilst attacking Sunderland players.
Right, excellent stuff then, Nick. Do let us know your comments, your overriding feelings of the season and what happens next.